I do believe in the fundamental strength of capitalism. And look, investor relations people are on the front line of that. They are the corporate mouthpieces. They are who speak for the corporations, and corporations are a big part of our country and our economic growth. So if they don't do their job correctly, then look no further than capitalism is going to suffer. And that's part of the problem with the big banks.
Yeah. One of the things that we've, the investor relations people I've interviewed over the years, they like to think that they're transmission belts taking investor concerns and analyst concerns back to the management. How many of them do you think took your concerns back to the management and sort of took the side and said, look, this is up with this, we really shouldn't put?
Well, that's one reason in the case of Citigroup, because I had been shut out from the company back the early part of last decade after I testified to Congress. And I thought, wow, if they can shut me out. And then I was proven right over time with many of my concerns on Citigroup. And then I testified to the Crisis Commission, and they shut me out again. I couldn't get a meeting. So when I went to the press, how could the top people at the company not know what's taking place? That was, after being around a couple decades, that was one approach. Other times I'm not always so sure if the message actually gets up the line. I think sometimes investor relations people are thinking, well, I'll shield senior management from these issues, so I'll have to bite the bullet.
Such sensitive wilting flowers, you have to look after them.
It's part of the, it's just everyone's covering their own positions.
I mean, almost all of your work has been in the financial sector. I mean, do you think this is something special to the financial sector? Because, in a sense, a lot of their capital is not raised from the shareholders. Almost the stock holding as a way to reward the executives with valuations. But they get so much money on the markets, in bonds and other forms of finance, that the actual equity is not a big part of their working capital, in a sense.
Yeah, this is not unique to the financial space. I mean, other people have come up to me on Wall Street saying we've had these run-ins with these companies, and sometimes another issue with investor relations people isn't just are you protecting the company at the expense of the owners, the shareholders, but are you simply protecting the top management of these companies? Are you truly protecting, in the case of the banks again, the bank teller, or are you protecting the bank CEO from some bad practices? At sometimes I do read between the lines. Investor relations people might not be very pleased with the executive compensation practices of top managers. And so they're in a difficult situation. How are you going to
Well, they're getting it in the neck from shareholders who want to know, how does this bozo think he's worth that much money when my stock value dropped by half last year?
Exactly. But I do think investor relations provide a service in aggregating the information from Wall Street analysts and investors and taking that up the flagpole. But does all that information actually get to the top? I'd like to see more of that information get to the board of directors. That's what I'd really like to see. I'd like to see a direct line from the investor relations person to the board. Maybe there's a lot of stuff they don't quite understand that they could understand if they got it from the front lines.
Yeah. It's also occurred to me, I mean, this book is almost a sort of how not to conduct investor relations. What you've written is the sort of negative textbook on investor relations. Your dealings have been so unfortunate with most of these financial institutions, with some of these financial institutions anyway.
I'd love to, if investor relations people read this book, I'd like to hear them say, you know what, you're exactly right. This is not the way to run an investor relations program. You don't want to, shield investors from accurate information, and you want to make sure that you have transparency of all these practices. And if someone has an issue, you really don't want to shut them out. I will say, I mean, the best practices are when these management teams incorporate the information from the outside. So this was one of the red flags at Citigroup. If you're going to shoot the messenger from the outside, what kind of signal does that send to people on the inside? As it turned out, Citigroup did shoot a few messengers from the inside when they were ringing the alarms about the bad mortgage practices before the meltdown, and then lo and behold. So these are indications of how companies are run based on how they treat Wall Street analysts like myself.
Mm-hmm.